This is the forgotten generation of MacBook. It feels like every MacBook Apple made from 2016 to 2019 has just disappeared off the face of the earth. And today I want to break down why. Why is nobody buying these computers? Why are they not worth your time? And why were they so bad to begin with? Well, to start, let's rewind to October 2016, which I think is kind of the starting point of this whole generation. You could argue that the 12-inch Retina MacBook, which came out in 2015, was technically the start of this new generation. It introduced the Force Touch trackpad and the butterfly keyboard, as well as USB-C. But it wasn't until 2016 that the design went mainstream. And this was where Apple revealed their grand vision for what the future of computers would be. And that's not an overstatement by any means. The intro montage for the 2016 MacBook Pro was basically positioning it as the next historical evolution of the laptop as a concept. And looking back on that 9 years later, it all looks a bit foolish, because now that generation of MacBook is nothing but a stain on the otherwise very nice history of Apple's devices. So how is it that everything went so wrong so quickly? And why is it that these computers have been the antithesis to Apple's traditional mantra of building really solid devices that last way longer than the competition? Well, to find out, I've brought out the best and the worst of this generation. On the right here, we have a 2017 Function Keys MacBook Pro. This was the entry-level model that came with a dual-core i5 and had function keys instead of the Touch Bar. And on the other side, we have the 2019 16-inch MacBook Pro with the Core i9. This is when Apple finally started to acknowledge some of the problems with this generation and make some changes. But unfortunately, it looks like it was too little too late. And nowadays, the landscape for these MacBooks is pretty bleak. Devices that just a couple of years ago were trading for $3,000 to $5,000 are now worth just a couple hundred. And even at those really low prices, they're still a bad deal. So let's unpack everything that went wrong right after a word from today's video sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by Gamma, the most popular AI-powered presentation app in the world. With over 50 million users, Gamma uses a staggering 20 different AI models in harmony to help you streamline the creation process. Gamma can be a helpful tool in the background or even create the starting point for your entire presentation. It's built to give you as much freedom as possible. For example, I took my huge spreadsheet full of benchmark numbers, which I wanted to turn into a readable presentation. And with just one sentence of instruction to get started, Gamma created a presentation complete with accurate graphs showing the different performance results and extrapolated takeaways from them. This would have been many hours of work manually creating graphs, and now I have a perfect starting point to go back in and edit and add detail where needed. Use Gamma to turn text into visuals, edit images, remove backgrounds, and more to easily fit them into your projects. With Gamma, I can focus on the content and let it handle the rest to get the look and feel that I'm going for. So check out the link in the description below to learn more about Gamma and get started today. And now let's get back to the video. So let's go back to that event in 2016 where Apple introduced the Touch Bar MacBook Pro. The hype leading up to that event was pretty substantial because we were all kind of waiting around to see how they could possibly top the Retina MacBook Pro. Introduced in 2012, those Retinas were absolutely legendary. They were extremely popular with photographers, videographers, programmers, pretty much anyone you could think of. It was the perfect all-around professional laptop with a beautiful display, thin and light design, and great performance. So when Apple announced the new MacBook Pro, a lot of people were apprehensive. It changed a couple of the key ingredients. Number one, the keyboard. The butterfly keyboard had already come out and was already generating some controversy, and now Apple was putting it on their most popular devices. And then it was USB-C. Frankly, Apple was right about USB-C, but they were definitely early. Back in 2016, going to Thunderbolt ports all around was a bold move. And then there was the Touch Bar itself. To many, this felt like a gimmick. Why replace the function keys just for the sake of getting something new if it doesn't have that much new functionality? But surely we thought over the years it would develop into something a lot more useful. And given the extremely beautiful design of these devices, I certainly was willing to take the chance. However, as Apple started iterating on these devices, it started to become clear that there were a lot of things not going their way. First of all, it was Intel. Intel was in the midst of a very, very dark time. They had been stagnating because, frankly, there was not a lot of competition from AMD and other markets. So if you look at the performance in Cinebench of a 2016 MacBook Pro compared to a 2012 unibody MacBook Pro with a freaking DVD drive, it's barely any faster. And the 2017 refresh of the MacBook Pro didn't help that much because going from the 6th to 7th generation Intel chips, again, didn't bring very much performance gain. So if you were buying a MacBook Pro in 2017, you were looking at spending $3,000+ for a Mac that didn't have that much better performance than a 5-year-old machine that you could buy for a couple $100 on eBay, put dual drives in, and upgrade the RAM. And in fact, those computers are kind of the reason that I have a job now. Back then, I would buy a couple of MacBooks on eBay, fix them up, and prove that for $400, $500, $600, you could get something that was honestly not that much slower than a brand new $3,000 machine. But never fear, because 2018 rolled around and Intel finally acknowledged that they needed to make some big moves. So the 2018 15-inch MacBook Pro introduced a radical 6-core Core i9, the first of its kind. But if you were around on YouTube back then, you kind of know how that went. It was a lot of power to be cramming into this thin and light design, and it didn't handle it particularly well.
Oh, shoot. Oh, hold on. Oh.
You had thermal throttling, you had battery issues, and by that point, the controversy over the butterfly keyboard was becoming a fever pitch. So the next year, Apple finally made the change that we all wanted them to make. The 2019 16-inch MacBook Pro was a pretty big deal, and it fixed a lot of the complaints that we had. But it was kind of overshadowed by the imminent release of Apple Silicon, which at that point was more than just a whisper on the street. We kind of knew that it was coming. But what we didn't know was just how fast it would change the game completely. To give you an idea of how quickly things changed, here's a graph of the Cinebench 2024 multi-core score of a bunch of different MacBooks from that prior generation. But then the 2019 16-inch came out and it blew everything out of the water. And then Apple Silicon dropped, and take a look at what happens to the graph. The M2 MacBook Air, which is fanless and costs $1,000, is scoring the same as a machine just 3 years older than it that costs $5,000. Not to mention the fact that when you run Cinebench on a fanless MacBook, it's, well, silent. But when you run it on this, it's kind of hard to overstate just how big a deal this was. Because I started out my career on this channel talking about 5-year-old machines that were 15% slower than a brand new one. And now, the cheapest MacBook Air you can buy is twice as fast as the most powerful Intel MacBook ever made. In Blender Classroom, you can really see how much of a difference has been made in the past couple of years. This 2017 Function Keys MacBook took over half an hour to render out a scene that the new MacBook Airs can render in less than 10 minutes. And again, those are MacBook Airs. This was a $1,300 MacBook Pro. And by the way, shout out to you guys for responding to my community post and sending in some benchmarks, because I didn't have every single model of Touch Bar MacBook Pro, but possibly even more impressive than the difference in CPU is what happened over here with GPUs, because the Radeon Pro 5500M dedicated GPU that's in this 16-inch, this was an upgrade. This has 8 gigs of VRAM. I definitely paid a couple $100s to get this GPU. And yet, when you run Tomb Raider at 1440p on the highest preset, what you'll find is the M4 that you can get in a frickin' iPad is just as powerful. And keep in mind that this is a game that was built for x86. And the M4 Max, which is obviously the more comparable modern version of this MacBook Pro, is just blowing it out of the water in just a couple of years. But then the problem that was created by this rapidly changing environment is, of course, that these machines that were thousands and thousands of dollars became almost instantaneously obsolete. Not obsolete in the sense that they're not usable, but in the sense that why would you ever buy one? I mean, these 2019 16-inch MacBook Pros, it's still gonna set you back, $200 to $400. And at that price, you can get an M1 MacBook Air. Sure, it might not have as big a screen or as much storage or as much RAM, but It is literally better in every single way. And if you pick a 2017 Touch Bar Butterfly Keyboard Intel MacBook Pro over an M1 MacBook Air, then you gotta get psychiatric help. I mean, something's clearly not right. I think the problem is these computers will never be cheap enough to justify how bad they are relative to how good everything is now. And adding insult to injury, the same factors that held these things back when they were brand new still apply. You can still find a 2015 15-inch MacBook Pro with more or less the same performance as the Touch Bar models for a lot lower price with upgradable storage and a usable keyboard. So if you need something cheap, you buy one of those. If you need something good, you buy Apple Silicon. There is literally no room in the market for these machines. It's incredible. I've never seen anything like this in my lifetime, which obviously, you know, that might date me a little bit. I'm sure many of you from the early 2000s or the 90s will remember when computers were obsolete like that. But in the last 10, 15 years, that hasn't been the case until now. But I'm curious to know what you guys think. Is there any hope for these Touch Bar Butterfly Keyboard MacBooks, or are they just going to live in obscurity until they're eventually too old and there's none of them left? Let me know in the comments down below. And of course, big thanks to you guys for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.